Bitcoin is just accelerating this movement that people move wherever it fits them best, but it also forces governments to rethink their policies. People smell the critical mass of Bitcoiners, the critical thinking, and their willingness to move wherever it fits them best. And this is, of course, a non-ignorable political force now as well. We have been trained into this belief that policy leads people. It has never been this way. People lead policy, and by extension, politics. If I have Bitcoin, there is a certain invincibility that comes with it. And now suddenly I don't have to chase the politician, but politician has to chase me. There is no way that Bitcoin does not generate these societally positive, nature positive, climate positive outcomes. In 2008, the societal contract between those institutions and the people has been broken. Capital senses change much quicker because change is often very tacit, very immaterial, something diffuse, but capital usually sees it in profits, spreads, and margins. Sooner or later, Bitcoin will anyways come to you. Bitcoin rewards you on an idea basis. It rewards you for the patience and the endurance and the resilience that you had. Thanks for having me. Warm greetings from Zurich.
Zurich, yeah, Switzerland is kind of it's one of the Bitcoin hubs for me in Europe. I think Switzerland has, if you're a Bitcoiner, Switzerland should be on your map to move there if your country is bad to you politically.
That's what I always said. You know, I'm Austrian by origin myself, so I've been living in Switzerland now for, oh my God, 25 years. And Switzerland grows on someone. And I think especially if you're a Bitcoiner and if you're interested in bottom-up democracies, I would call it, Switzerland is the perfect place. And I think it's a natural match. You have a neutral country that should adapt the most neutral currency. So I think we will see a lot of really, really good news coming out of Switzerland. And there are amazing people here. And like typically Swiss, they are not like massively on the radar, on the international radar, but there's a lot of work going on in the background. So it's more a philosophy of don't tell till it's done. But I can assure you there's a lot of networking, a lot of good momentum, both on the institutional adoption side in terms of what is Bitcoin as money, but also on the infrastructure side, what can Bitcoin mining achieve for societal prosperity.
I think it could be an interesting topic for us also to discuss, because when we talk about Bitcoin, we talk a lot about El Salvador, we talk a lot about the US this year because of the election and Trump being on the conferences. Mm-hmm. But we don't talk that much how is actually in Europe Bitcoin going, and what are the consequences of Bitcoin right now in Europe with Bitcoin. How do you see Europe being towards Bitcoin right now? Are you scared for the future that they might do something bad to them, or how do you see it?
Yeah, it's indeed a very interesting angle. I think there are different perspectives to it, and let me start with the El Salvador and US piece. And I think every country has its merit in the Bitcoin conversation. I think every country comes from a different place. El Salvador comes from a place of societal despair, you would call it. The US comes from a position of incredible power and thriving to establish or manifest that power for a very long time. And as I said, I mean, Switzerland comes also with a history that makes it more or less prone to be a Bitcoin nation. And I think one of which is clearly if you look into the history of Switzerland in itself, it's a federal state that grew consecutively to the size that it currently is. It's a very young nation, but it's a very proud nation in terms of civil liberties, neutrality, societal participation, societal discourse. And I think that those are values that we typically also share in the Bitcoin space. So there's sort of a natural fit going on. And I think what went a bit under the radar is that as the SNB, the Swiss National Bank, is a publicly traded institution, it also holds general assemblies, which are broadcasted. And a couple of years ago, someone with a very low follow count, essentially asked to speak there, and he gave a firing 2.5 minute speech for Switzerland as the most neutral country historically should adapt the most neutral currency, so that the idea of a strategic reserve is actually much older as an idea than just as it originated now in the US conversation. So I find that very interesting, and you see that people are very tech savvy, very, very progressive when it comes to these instruments that will help to capture societal value and spread societal prosperity. So you see it in the society-wide adoption rate. Switzerland ranks really, really high up. I think not as far up as Austria, actually, by the way, which always surprises me. But you see a lot of movement there, and Bitcoin slowly makes its way into the societal discourse, with all ups and downs, of course. So I'm very bullish on Switzerland, because I think the idea here is more to manifest the idea of the national sovereignty, independence and neutrality, which is a very powerful angle that resonates with people. So I'm really curious to see how this will develop in the future. And in the near future, though, so I'm very, very happy that I'm here and I'm able to participate in this conversation. To your second question, Europe is a difficult place, and I think you can answer that question from different angles. If you look at it from a European angle purely, I think it's a desperate situation. It's a dire situation, but it only sort of it's one in many. There's a long row of dire decisions and what's the word for it? What the word I'm looking for? Dire is probably the right word for it, but I think the European idea has been sort of hijacked by bureaucrats, and I think this is a very dangerous development. We should be very wary of that, but it's not only the attack angle towards Bitcoin, it's the attack angle towards freedom of speech, chat surveillance, stupid tech regulations that stifle innovation. There's a lot of unfortunate regulation going on. Bitcoin mining is the least of European problems, but it's sort of intertwined with one of the biggest European problems that we have, namely the energy security angle and the necessary condition for prosperity that we have cheap and abundant energy, where Europe obviously has its own history of how the cheap and abundant has been established, which is now jeopardized through the Russian Ukrainian conflict. And I think Switzerland cannot isolate itself from that conversation. Obviously, Switzerland is, or the European Union is, Switzerland's largest trading partner by far. We are surrounded by, I think, 7 European countries. There is a high degree of interdependencies politically, through legacy frameworks and international contracts, but also very physically on the trade side of things, not only for goods but also for energy. So I think nobody should be fooled when someone says we don't care here in Switzerland what Europe experiences, because Switzerland's destiny is hugely intertwined with the European destiny. So in that sense, I would recommend us to lead by example as Switzerland, but also take positive influence by showcasing what can be done, how a positive transition can be accomplished, and hopefully spread the word and start to influence also European policymakers. And I think the past couple of weeks have been super interesting in that regard, because I remember a month ago, approximately, one of the states here in Switzerland has forced the notion, or the parliament of the state has forced the notion to study Bitcoin mining and its role in grid stabilization and renewable build out, which is an incredibly and impressive ambition. And we see these sparks now sort of flipping over to the European continent as well, or to the European political continent, that people just pick up on it. And I think these stories matter. And the closer these stories are to your country, to where you live, the better they are. You know, for us as Europeans, we listen to the stories from El Salvador, but it's a little bit difficult to relate to that. And as a European, I think it's easier to relate to a Swiss story, or for a Swiss person, it's easier to relate to a European story. So in that sense, I don't think that we can sort of dissect each other. We're one continent. We are so heavily intertwined in everything that we do. And but that also means that the solutions are intertwined as well. So leading by example within the autonomy that the countries individually have, where, of course, Switzerland has more political autonomy than the other European countries that are within the EU 27. But then again, you know, over the long run, we need to spread this to every country on the planet.
I think it's great. I'm aware of that we have a lot of US and also Indians and Australians listeners and watchers here. I just want to pull that up for people to understand what you talked about. That here Switzerland right in the middle, and we have all those European Union, so like EU states. Basically circling in on Switzerland, because like the other states like Britain, and they are like a little bit have more breathing room, and Switzerland is basically really within a European Union circle, but they're not in the European Union. So that's a really interesting situation. Do you see any chance actually within the Swiss population that they vote for a joining of the European Union?
It's an interesting one. Historically, the Swiss have been asked if they wanted to join the European Union. And maybe to add a little bit of color to what you just said, Switzerland is also not a homogeneous country. It's by no means. There are 4 national languages. We talk German, we talk French, we talk Italian in the south, and there's a 4th ancient, almost dialect language, which is called Rhaeto-Romanian, that nobody understands because it's so old and not related to any other of the languages. And so there are 4 languages, and they are politically also traditionally a bit in divide. So the German-speaking majority, which is the largest population in Switzerland, they actually voted against joining the European Union back in the days, 20, 25, 20, 30 years ago or something. And the French and the Italians were actually in favor of it. So I think now, over time, it has shown that to not join this bloc, so to say, this political union, and seeking affiliation to this political union by carefully crafting bilateral contracts that allow certain freedoms but restrict others, that was definitely the right move. And I think we see that now. And where do you see it? Usually how well a country is doing. You see it usually in the currency, appreciating against others. People trust these countries. The structural prerequisites more. Switzerland has now a debt to GDP of roughly 30%. We have 0.7% inflation. When we have not joined the European Union, which means we're not running under an ECB a policy that gives, of course, much more flexibility to move and to tailor the instruments in a way that it serves the population and the economy best. And we see those results playing out right now.
It's also interesting. We had the EU election this year, and there are many other elections coming. Austria had the national election. Germany soon has the national election. And kind of a trend that I see is those parties who are critical of EU policies like the Digital Service Act, in general EU, they are becoming more powerful. So it almost seems that the skepticism against EU policies, especially those who try to interfere with freedom of the citizens, those really seem to gain popularity, which gives me a lot of hope that people are aware of the problem. The people are kind of waking up to that, and it's super interesting to see Switzerland also. Switzerland basically has a very similar landscape than Austria, and I always say like Switzerland is for me the Austria without the EU, which in my thinking right now is a positive thing, even though I don't think right now Austria would benefit from exiting the EU, but that's a whole nother discussion. But yeah, it's really interesting to see the European landscape and how it will develop politically over time. I think the next 10 years will be very exciting to see what's going on in the EU.
I think this is, you're mentioning, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the ultimately bullish case for Bitcoin, right? Because we are most interested to shape the world around us. And if you own property, if your children go to school, you wanna make sure that the space that you're living in works the best way possible. And I think, with Bitcoin, it gives you one element of storing your value and retaining your purchasing power while being as mobile as you can possibly be. So I think we will see a lot of reshuffling and a lot of rejoicing around where people move. The degree to which people move is increasing. And where do we have a proxy for that? We see it through the rushing through of country exiting taxes that are rushed through parliaments, because of course you want to prevent those freedoms. Now, I think this is the big problem that these bureaucratic top-down structures simply have. You cannot, on the one hand, advocate for freedom of movement of capital, freedom of movement for humans, and then tax them if they want to take their wealth with them. So these are the inconsistencies that I see happening. But people, as always, will find a way. And I'm 100% bullish on human incentives, and I'm 100% bearish on ancient or archaic policy making, because it just doesn't work. And I think Bitcoin is just accelerating this movement that people move wherever they feel it fits them best. But it also forces governments to rethink their policies. And I think if you then choose through your vote, then well, you've made your voice heard. And if there is a proponent that picks up on that, like Trump, let's not kid ourselves, like Trump did, like the FDP, the Liberal Party in Germany is doing right now. So people smell the critical mass of Bitcoiners, the critical thinking, and their willingness to move wherever it fits them best. And this is, of course, a non-ignorable political force now as well. And I really hope that this is also starting to slowly reshape the political landscape and the political momentum, and sort of reverts a lot of the unfortunate policy making that has happened in the past.
That was super funny for me. Christian Lindner talking about Bitcoin, and he basically saying that the government he was in, the chancellor of him, he slept on Bitcoin, but he was for 4 years the finance minister while Germany was selling the Bitcoin, while this was all going on, and he's
not his fault, by the way. Which is not his fault. He gets shit for something that is not within his authority.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think as a finance minister, you can at least speak up. Like if you are a Bitcoiner and you're the finance minister of Germany, and it's not Germany selling Bitcoin, it's the Saxony, a district of Germany, basically selling those Bitcoin, and they have the laws and all those things, and they have all those things. We covered that on the podcast sometimes. it's not his fault, but still he could speak up about that. And it's just really interesting to see on his last day of as finance minister, all of a sudden he speaks about Bitcoin. I never heard any word about him, or especially not in the parliament, probably maybe on some podcast or some interview. He probably mentioned Bitcoin in some way or shape or form. But it's really interesting that he now is no longer part of the government. And on the first day where he's not on the government, he's like, "Hey, Bitcoiners, please vote for the FDP. Please do that." And it will be really interesting to see how, because Germany is really important for the EU. It's the biggest country from almost all metrics probably for the EU. So if Germany actually gets a pro Bitcoin vote, if like, I don't know, two parties adopt like a good stance on Bitcoin, and those two parties, maybe even like three parties, get a majority vote or like 40% or 50% of the vote, this shows a lot then where the direction is going for the EU also, because EU is basically just a collection of all the countries. So if the countries want something different, the EU wants something different. That's what was also the important thing here. So I do have a lot of hope, to be honest, for the EU, and I hope that Christian Lindner is now really for Bitcoin, and he's not just like in one speech, and not just for the how is it called, election. The same way I hope that Trump actually also follows suit, that he actually does something, and not just is on the Bitcoin conference because he acknowledges that it's a big voters group, the Bitcoiners. But yeah, it's as you said in the beginning, you cannot jail people anymore because they have Bitcoin. The empowerment of the individual, it's a real big thing. And also something really beautiful that you said, that we have to build, basically, we have to love our neighbors, we have to build our neighborhoods, and we have to really locally try to do good stuff and build good connections, and then grassroots Bitcoin movement will come up. And I think that's a beautiful thing to say and to do. And yeah, what the politicians will do will be a consequence of what the people really want and what the people push up to the politics. Actually, it should be pushing down to the politicians, but that's a whole nother thing. Yeah,
I think this is exactly it. This fiat system has unlearned who we are in society, has unlearned or untrained us in who we really are in society. If we vote with our money, we have enormous power over where resources are allocated, what is produced, and it's the same with votes. We have been trained into this belief that policy leads people. It has never been this way. People lead policy, and by extension, politics. So if we now have another option, which is a non-political or political option, I mean, you can have another podcast about whether Bitcoin is political or not political, but it shakes the equilibrium. It's a disturbing force in this system. And suddenly it allows people to look onto the legacy system in a very different way. And suddenly you realize, if I have Bitcoin, there is a certain invincibility that comes with it. And now suddenly I don't have to chase the politician, but the politician has to chase me. And I think one thing where we have to also be a bit patient and be a bit more forgiving maybe in the community is, if I ask you, who had the purest of of motives when he or she came into the Bitcoin space? We all came for money go up. We all came for raw self motives, or incentives to drive to drive value of our bags. And then we slowly started to, go down the rabbit hole, learn about it, develop different perspectives onto it. And I have no problem with the fact that the inevitable happens, that a politician, by raw incentives and survival instinct, picks up on Bitcoin, because it just drives adoption. It has the potential to accelerate adoption. I think one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin itself is the immutability of the protocol itself. So the outcomes that Bitcoin drive in terms of we save more, we spend less. We can use mining for, making grids more efficient, use stranded energy, make electricity systems more resilient. All of this is all nice and dandy. Yeah. And this is all good. How you, and Bitcoin drives this deterministically. There is no way that Bitcoin does not generate these societally positive, nature positive, climate positive outcomes. And how you came into the space, you're welcome. Let's be more, because if you have inelastic supply and more brains flooding into this system, it just will amplify the positive effects of what Bitcoin will do. And we will need everybody. We will need capital, we will need talent, we will need engineers, we will need philosophers, and we will also need politicians, even if they don't understand that maybe it is actually making them more obsolete or faster obsolete, or legacy systems faster obsolete. But that's then a normal course of life and the circle of life. Things are building, things get to a pinnacle state, and then they decay. And I think we're seeing this, what I like to call a reinstitutionalization, because we had institutions. They worked for a very long time. They worked to serve the people very well. But slowly, somewhere around 2000, at maximum impact in 2008, the societal contract between those institutions and the people has been broken. And it has been increasingly broken ever since. That's why I think also Broken Money is such a good title. And now we have inevitably a reinstitutionalization, the reinstitutionalization of money. We redefine what money is. We redefine what institutions are in a more networked society. We might, in 100 years from now, even rethink what a state is, because probably we will not even need this anymore, because we have other means to organize ourselves in a meaningful and efficient way. And I think this is the magic moment that we live through, and it's totally normal that things that you participate in your own decay. Kodak developed the first digital camera. Did they capitalize on it? No. Did it even kill them? Yes. So I think this is a normal progression, and things that happen in nature, things that happen in the economy. We, for some reason, believe that in institutional terms, this cannot happen. No, of course it happens. It continuously renews itself. It evolves. And I think we have probably, this might be recency bias on our end, but I think we have never seen a more radical and accelerated form of reinstitutionalization that we're seeing currently. And I think it's fascinating to be part of that journey.
It's something really interesting also going. You are also part of we talked about it before, the European Bitcoin Energy Association. I got it right?
Yeah.
Perfect. What is that, and what are you trying to accomplish there?
I think the idea of EBIA started from understanding that if we want broad societal acceptance of Bitcoin, we need to go beyond the monetary or the monetary property of the asset itself as a store of value instrument. And I think Bitcoin offers much more. And Bitcoin requires energy as an extrinsic factor to maintain the integrity of the ledger. But it's of course, through that, it's integral to, and integrally dependent on the energy infrastructure itself as well. And what we've seen is, and what we have learned also through Bitcoin and studying Bitcoin and Bitcoin related use cases, is just to surface how inefficient, how vulnerable energy systems actually are. And we see that more and more now, and if you want to, we can go much deeper into that. But I think the key message is, let's look at something that provides these societally positive outcomes, but let's also look at it as an instrument, as a leverage instrument, how we can make our energy systems more resilient, how we can provide more energy to more people, because we will need significantly more energy in the future and not less. This is a big gaslighting lie that we will need, or that we will only require less energy in the future. No, we will need much more. And to communicate those positive outcomes that Bitcoin mining can provide for the energy system, and by extension for the prosperity or the prospect of prosperity for the people. This is hugely important, because this is what people care about. If you can show them how something can provide them real value in the real world, in their lives, that's a good thing. And even if you don't save in Bitcoin, you might be interested in having the cheapest possible energy bill at the end of the month. And so the funny thing, and this is really an irony, is that one of the few policy decisions, one of the few policy pushes that the EU got relatively right is how to rethink energy infrastructure and energy systems in Europe. We could go into detail, but this becomes then very, very technical. And the funny thing is, it has, in a way, by the language it has chosen, Bitcoin mining written all over it. But the politicians, the technical people, the ones that have sort of advised the policy making, they have not connected the dots. So what IBIA is trying to do is to collect as many use cases as possible, to provide as much factual evidence as possible, so that it also can positively inform policy making, so that we use the opportunity for Bitcoin mining that are already written in the laws that are law right now. And so these are laws around how energy systems have to ensure that energy is optimally consumed, that curtailment is not an option anymore, that you are not allowed to curtail. So you need to generate. So you need also to provide business cases that can take off this energy in the most opportunistic way possible. How new build outs can be monetized, and so on and so forth. How heat needs to be reused. This is not only a Bitcoin mining related issue. Also, every data center now in Europe will look at reusing the heat for heat as a service purposes. And I think we can all agree that's a good thing. And ironically, this heat reuse push, which is one of the most recent, I would say, sort of technical innovations that Bitcoin mining brought about, this is in a way an indirect result of the European policy making. While of course hash rate went skyrocketed and miners were looking to diversify their revenue streams. Yes, that's all nice and dandy, but you see there's a lot of confluence from the technical push, from the side of the technical push and the technical requirement, the economic requirement, and the policy requirements. And to communicate that upstream to the politician is incredibly useful for them, but also to communicate downstream and help the industry to understand what are the do's and don'ts within these policies, where can you push into safely, where are you safe, where are you testing the frontiers. This is also very useful, and like that we sort of build a platform of conversation between the use cases and the policy making, which we hope then to be able to amplify not only on the European level, but also on the nation state level. So I'm doing work on that in that regard in Switzerland, and of course opportunities like the parliamentary inquiry from the canton of Bern that needs to study those effects of Bitcoin mining. This is where our results then come handy, and we can provide the evidence so that hopefully policy can shift into Bitcoin mining's favor.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece. And make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure, it's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. Interesting. Yeah, it seems to be so obvious that the energy sector should be into Bitcoin, that the energy sector is like, oh, like let's all have more Bitcoin miners. When I hear where you get paid to have a Bitcoin mining site just to stand by to take some electricity off the grid, even in Austria, what 21 Energy has some projects there. Or I talked with Americans, they say like they have to pay to get energy off the energy providers because sometimes it's too much. Like, yeah, like just plug in a Bitcoin miners and your problem is solved. It seems to be so obvious, but not a lot of companies actually do it now. That there seems to be a discrepancy between the actual use case of it versus the people actually using it. So like the use case is there, the tools are there, everything is there. Is it just education? Is it just time that we need there, or?
Yeah, it's a good one. Education is critically important. When I say education, I mean, can we sit someone from the energy sector down, explain them that we understand their problems, which is essentially a demand-supply mismatch, and that we understand how they're dealing with it currently, the nuts and bolts of how curtailment actually work, and that suddenly you propose a solution that allows you to not having to do this. So curtailment sounds so simple when you read it in 140 characters on Twitter, but it's actually a very sophisticated thing that needs to happen. And so this is not, and everything that is, it's a typical engineering question. Everything that is sophisticated and complex also has is error prone. Yeah. So if you can make something less error prone by avoiding having to do something that is super complex, is already a win. And I think this is often misunderstood when we say we help someone to offtake surplus energy. This is not necessarily only the economic value that matters. It is the risk that matters, or the risk prevention that matters, that something goes wrong. Like we have seen recently also in Germany and European countries, when suddenly then supply and demand mismatch cannot be rectified, and then prices just skyrocket into the thousands of dollars per megawatt hour. The second element is incentives. We are again at incentives. The energy systems are dramatically, to a dramatic extent, falsely incentivized. Currently, energy generators make so much money. They don't have any incentive to change any of that by introducing uncertainties that they don't understand and cannot control. So this is the second one. And then you have also a large problem around roles and responsibilities, because when we speak about energy, the energy sector, it's actually a lot of actors. You have the power generators, you have the aggregators, and then you have the so-called TSOs, the transmission system operators. And those are usually the limiting factor in many ways, because think of it like a river. The TSO define how much water can actually go through. So even if you have more water upstream, there's just not more water that can go through. And obviously, what you then do, if you can control how much water is up there, you say, well, my power, my water that I produce or that is generated up there does not find its final destination. So I either do not build it, or I curtail it, or I even dismantle it, because there's no economic case for it. And it's exactly the same in the power systems. Our power demand has increased so dramatically over the past 20 years. And it's not only the power demand in itself, but the electrified power. This is a very, very important specification. But the infrastructure that transmits that power has not been updated significantly. So essentially, a lot of supply now meets very, very, very constrained transmission capacity to bring power from A to B. And these system operators, these transmission system operators, they are not incentivized in how much power goes through from A to B. They are incentivized in the integrity of the grid. So they need to keep the frequency at the specific values, because this is how they are incentivized. And if you now, as a upstream supplier of power, go to the TSOs and say, but I have power, I need to give this to you, then they say, it's none of my interest. I'm not incentivized to build out more transmission capacity. And the politicians then force the TSOs to do something about it, but then the TSOs say, well, this is very expensive. And if you make me do that, then I will put the expenditure for this build out onto the bills of the consumers. And that is not a very popular political decision either. So they have a lot of bargaining power and very little incentive in rolling out more transmission capacity, which brings me to Bitcoin. And now, obviously, we can now think of an alternative scenario. We will always need transmission. This is absolutely key. But what Bitcoin mining offers is to offtake at source. So we may not need a transmission capacity to monetize the power that is there. We can do it on site. And that allows us to build smaller energy communities, smaller energy units. A huge factor which is under discussed is how batteries and storage capacity will also provide a technological platform for new business cases that we don't even know yet how they will look like. But what we will see over time is that because we need more power where we need it, generation will also move there. And transmission will always be important, but transmission will be less and less important in the future. But what we will see is a decentralization of the energy systems. And Bitcoin mining incentivizes that as well, because we can monetize now the power at source. And that's a very, very beautiful thing, because more decentralized systems also means more resilient systems. And that's a very, very positive future for the energy systems as well.
Interesting. It still seems very obvious to me, but it was a good explanation of like what are the roadblocks there and what are the challenges there, and the incentive structure is definitely very interesting. As if you don't have the incentive to do something, you will not do it.
Oh no! And this is, I think, the first thing that we as Bitcoiners should appreciate about another person, because we know how strong our incentives are to do something or to not do something. So we need to grant the same right, even if we disagree with it, even if it's a net negative for themselves and society. But this is then the Peter Schiff syndrome. You can understand the problem, but you can still not act on it for whatever reason.
Yeah, Peter Schiff is an interesting character. I think he's just afraid that he loses face at this point. He's too intelligent. He's too smart to not understand Bitcoin.
He feeds off. He's like. He feeds off the Bitcoiners' hate, and I think he's just a professional shitposter that sits at home in his underwear, drinks a beer, and has a laugh every day that he can trigger 100 million Bitcoiners.
That's true. Yeah, it's hard to decide if he's actually not getting it, or at this point just trolling Bitcoiners. I've no clue what's actually going on, but yeah, I also don't have really an incentive to find out.
Yeah, exactly.
Really cool, perfect. One thing that you also discussed with, I think, I don't know if you recorded that or we discussed it before, was the investment legacy, people coming into Bitcoin. And I hear when I go into legacy investment, there's a lot of ESG investments, a lot of like, we have to invest there because there's some rules around that. Is that a big discussion, or is that kind of what you meant by that?
Yeah, maybe to describe the lay of the land. Capital is an interesting beast because I think capital has one trait that is very interesting. It senses change much quicker because change is often very tacit, very, very immaterial, something diffuse. But capital usually sees it in profits, spreads, and margins. And capital is very, very sensitive to changes in those structures. Yeah. So that's, for instance, also one of the reasons why I'm a firm believer that there will be a demonetization of real estate, and Bitcoin will be one of the big profiteers on that end, because it's just capital just sees that with the different risk profiles around real estate, the market conditions around real estate, the macro environment around real estate, it's not a favorable environment to be in. Now, this takes time to shift from one investment class to the next at scale, but it's going to happen. And I think what I'm interested in, and this is sort of what I bring, or this interface that I'm bringing into the conversation, is that I've seen how these ESG capital pools think. They had the time of their life between 2016 and 2020, 2021-ish around, where suddenly the entire topic of climate change, biodiversity, nature positive investment sort of moved from, the dark corners into bright light. Yeah. And you can say about Greta Thunberg whatever you want, but she has managed to change the conversation, and the societal framing of this conversation. And capital followed suit. You saw that. The amounts of money that suddenly labeled as ESG, that suddenly labeled as climate tech, and invested as such, was massive. But as we know from Bitcoin, hypes don't last that long, and usually they are followed by a correction. And I think this is exactly the correction that we're currently seeing. It's interesting to observe that high interest rates combined made a restrictive monetary policy has been a killer for every hyped capital allocation, and ESG and climate tech was one of those. So you now have a lot of capital pools that sit on heavier bag than we in 2017. Yeah. So they have bought overvalued investments that have now corrected value massively. They have been marked down massively. And there's no good new ventures and no good investment thesis, and no good directionality for those type of investments. And what I mean by that is regulatory clarity. What you don't want as an investor is that BlackRock is 2020 ESG all over the place and ditches ESG in 2024. This is not a good thing for capital allocated because they usually operate on time horizons of 5 to 8 years. And if you can see that the narrative can shift so dramatically within 3-4 years, you are not going there. And so what I love about the climate Bitcoin thesis is that, as we said beforehand, that Bitcoin just also, which is one dimension, provides these incredibly deterministic climate positive outcomes and nature positive outcomes. There's many such cases. 21 Energy is one of those. If you manage to use heat as a service while mining Bitcoin, you have the potential to disrupt any oil and gas heating system. Oil and gas heating system and building management is 15% of the CO2 emissions of the annual inventory. So we're talking about big numbers here. Yeah. And so as these companies are now seeing or experiencing their hangover from the high times that they had and they overlooked the top and they are now holding very, very heavy bags, they are desperate to look for new investment and growth thesis around nature positivity, because that's actually a good thing, even if many Bitcoiners do not agree with that, and Bitcoin at the same time. And luckily enough, Bitcoin offers that. And so that's a very, very good thing. And I see these changes slowly happening. And it surprised me that people like Max Kaiser, for instance, picked up on that issue. And he said, look, climate change is real. If you believe in it or not, it's my opinion or my view or my scientific savviness is not relevant. Where we see that things are changing is in commodity pricing, commodity price discovery. We see it in inflation around products and services. If you own a house today in California, you'd better sell, because your fire insurance bill has been skyrocketing for 10,000% in the recent years. This is not because someone just wants to rip you off, but it is a repricing. It's a repricing of a service that everybody needs, but had to be repriced given the recent history. And so, funnily enough, this is where we see climate change manifesting. And we see it in the capital markets, and we see it in the commodity markets, and we see it in the service markets. And so this is, for instance, also one of the arguments why there's going to be an increasing pressure on real estate, because flooding, droughts, fires, and so on and so forth for immobile goods is not a good combination. Yeah. So in a way, the best hedge against climate change or climate change vulnerable investments is Bitcoin as well, because I can now take my wealth with me, even if on balance, the two values have the same asset value. I would always choose Bitcoin because this is the one that is less vulnerable to these environmental risks that we're increasingly observing. And so I think for us as private individuals, for us as advisors, for us that work with capital pools, it's much easier to talk about it. It's much harder to shift the narrative within an organization that has governance rules and so on and so forth. But we see this happening and we see it changing as well. So my hope is that also this interface or this gap between ESG capital and Bitcoin will close over time. And this is exactly where I'm positioned, where I'm helping to translate also why this is actually a good investment case and how you can build an investment portfolio around climate tech or climate positive outcomes and Bitcoin.
I think that's a great intersection to be in. And I had, I just noticed because I have a lot of guests on, but the guests talking about Bitcoin mining within the last week or even like in last like 1.5 months been increasing really a lot. I think Bitcoin mining is an overlooked topic, and I talked yesterday, so for the viewers probably like 3-4 episodes behind, about that block space and that being a critical infrastructure for countries, and that being kind of almost like a warfare of who has the most power for that block space in the future. And we should not talk about national strategic reserve. We should talk about who has the most block hash rate in which country, and who is controlling that block space. Are they small miners? Are it big miners? Are they in the middle? What pools are they having? How many pools do we have? So I think there are super interesting topics in Bitcoin mining, and I will set it myself as a small goal for next year to get more into Bitcoin mining, to actually gain more knowledge in that, because there are really interesting topics in there. And so thank you so much for bringing one facet of Bitcoin mining to this podcast. I think it was highly informative already.
Most welcome. Thank you very much for the feedback. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think the cool thing is that, so I think for us as observers, I'm always taking two perspectives. I'm an observer that looks sort of what's happening on a net global scope, and what's happening, if you're a miner. I think miners will disagree with me, because they will say times will get much, much harder in the future. I think I predict that in 1 year from now, in 2 years from now, 60-70% of the mining use cases that we know today will not exist anymore, will be disrupted by other applications, as it should be. They will be disrupted by storage capacity and storage-based use cases. They will be disrupted by higher premium, higher value applications like artificial intelligence rendering or other compute as a service applications. But for Bitcoin mining, from a global perspective, I think this is an incredibly exciting time, because we are about to witness the next generation of mining innovation. We don't know yet where the next source of stranded electricity and power is. We don't know yet which additional revenue streams will be able to be extracted that will help value extraction out of the mining process. We don't know that yet. But we get a glimpse if we look, for instance, into the Emirates. Just as an example, one of the largest solar-powered solar PV farms. It has been finished this year in Saudi Arabia, 600 megawatts. It's a fairly decent size. And in electricity and power, you have one concept which is called levelized cost of electricity, LCOE. It essentially provides a unit of account, a meter, to compare the price of one power generation with another. And so you look into the upstream capex that you need to generate the power, the refinement, the dispatching, and also at the end of life, the maintenance, and then at the end of life, the end of life processing of all of that. And this is a very important gauge, because it tells you where the economic incentives are. And you can see that because oil is getting more and more difficult to find and to extract, we see the levelized cost of energy for oil and gas going up. And then you see solar PV, which is falling off a cliff. And just to give you an idea of how much falling off a cliff they are, you have the International Energy Agency has predicted around 1 cent per kilowatt hour in the year 2050, levelized cost of electricity. And this power plant in Saudi Arabia has achieved LCOE of 1.05 cents per kilowatt hour in year 2024, meaning 26 years before it was initially predicted. So this is how cheap solar power is. Now, you rightfully will argue, yes, but this doesn't help us because we need baseload, we need dispatchable baseload, and that is all very true. That's why I predicted the renaissance of nuclear already years back, because that's essentially the sweet spot of how power can be generated. That is low emission and baseload and at scale. But what is funny is that if you read between the lines, the Saudis have immediately partnered with the large scale miners to provide this bio first resort infrastructure to actually offtake the power that is generated there. And why do they do this? Not because they want to mine Bitcoin. Yes, of course they want to mine Bitcoin, because if you have, and that's what you mean, I think by block space, I think he called it. If you have significant amount of mining power, and you have a statistical chance of mining every thousands of 5,000 blocks, you're not interested in the economic viability of your business case. What you want is to be able to clear your own transaction and constitute your own block. So essentially, that means that you have suddenly built power infrastructure, but you have also secured a lifeline for your transactions should you be cut off the SWIFT network for any reason. So suddenly you have secured your power infrastructure and you have created a business case that is non-economic. It is a business case of national security, that you know that once in a while you will be able to constitute your own block and clear your own transactions. But in the meantime, you of course built the infrastructure, the distribution infrastructure, the off-taking infrastructure, the storage infrastructure that provides the infrastructure that can take off the power as well. And slowly, the miners will be phased out and other business cases will come along. And as it should be, it's only a power off-taker of first and last resort. And the marginalization in the beginning of the economic cycle and at the end of the economic cycle it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Yeah. So I don't think that we will see these large scale data centers somewhere, anywhere in Europe, but that's a good thing. It's net positive for the distribution of the hash rate, that German engineers will build the best KYC tools to shadow mine, integrate that into their sellers, into their mini profitability cases in their own solar panels, infrastructure with their neighbor, whatever. I don't know where this is going, but I think over time we will see hash rate getting more and more under pressure, or mining getting more and more under pressure, or mining profitability getting more and more under pressure, with an increased need of looking for even more stranded sources of energy, and so on and so forth. And the pressure for alternative business cases that provide more economic viability to the one who runs the site will get higher and higher and higher. And I think this will just substantiate and make the Bitcoin network incredibly robust. But it also means that 90% of the miners that we know today will probably not survive. 90% of the mining use cases will probably not survive. But it just over time, it will just, human ingenuity will drive the innovation forward.
Super interesting. I love that space already. Bitcoin mining, 350 podcast episodes. I'm still learning new stuff every day. It's fascinating. But coming to one question that I ask each and every one of my guests is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
Oh my God. From me or about me?
From you, but it can also be about you as you want.
From me, and take it from someone that is already older, because I'm really feeling, I'm 46 by now. I'm feeling old in this space.
Oh, you're the average Bitcoiner.
Yeah. Thank you. You're too kind.
I have data to back it up. Wait, you can go on and talk.
That makes me feel better. No, but I think we all say we move away from where we are. We need to fit a certain bill because this is what the Twitter echo chamber makes us believe, that that there's only one way to think about the world. I think one of the big beauties of this space is that everybody is a Bitcoiner and something else. And I would wish that people would be more vocal and more proud of the something else that they are as well, because this is exactly what we need. Big things happen at the interface of one thing and another. Yeah, the Latin word, or the word intelligence, comes from interlegere, from the Latin interlegere. It means between the lines, and we need to have two lines to read between the lines. And I think this is exactly this knowledge that each and everybody holds, but we're not vocal enough because we tend to bash on people for their non-conformal Bitcoin views and the things that they are as well. And I wish that people would be more proud of the something else that they are as well. So I'm an environmentalist. I care where how our nature looks like. I know what it means to have an increasing amount of extreme weather events. I don't want to be in this space to say, I told you so. And I think everybody carries these knowledge, and our space would be much richer if we would be also more vocal about it. And I love Switzerland. I love to be here. I would not move to El Salvador. Maybe I hope I can visit it at some point, but also stay where you are, because you are needed where you are. You can bring a lot of this. Sometimes we want to push things into the Bitcoin space, but actually sometimes I think it's even cooler to pull from the Bitcoin space into the space where you are, because sooner or later Bitcoin will anyways come to you. Just be patient.
That's a great way to look at it. I will just show you. I have around sometimes 50,000, sometimes 40,000, sometimes 100,000 watchers every month on YouTube. Depends on the month. So it's not representative of the whole space. But I can show you that the age range of my viewers here, even though I'm very young, so young hosts probably get more young audience. The average is 35 to 44 years, and the range of 45 to 55 years is bigger by a substantial amount bigger than 25 to 35 years. So I guess the average will be probably around 45 to 50 more likely. And when you look at the numbers of how many people are there under 18, zero. Apparently nobody under 18 years watches that channel. Maybe also has something to do that I don't right now don't do shorts. I will do them in the future again. And above 65, which is really like, I'm 26. There's a big range to 65 years old. 6.1%. That's a huge amount. That's a huge number also there. So
that's super interesting.
The space is more mature than you might think. I've also thought it's younger than that, but it's actually not. And that's from a young YouTube Bitcoin only host. If I would be, let's say, 50. Probably that would be even more skewed towards an older age, because people like people that are familiar and stuff like that. I just wanted to show you this, that I think you are right around the average age of a Bitcoiner.
It's fascinating. We're not as vocal, I think. I think the Twitter audience is skewed towards the younger audience, because I think you are just better at running the pace of Bitcoin Twitter.
we are more vocal on social media in general, I think. On social media, you think everything is younger. But I think the producers of social media content is younger and not the consumers. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of older people that just like to listen on a podcast. And if you're totally honest, you might have more time also if you're older to watch the podcast than when you are maybe, I don't know, 28 and you're just starting a family and you work really hard. If you're in your pension, you don't have to take care of kids and stuff like that. You have maybe time to watch 3, 4, 5 podcasts on a day. Mm-hmm. So yeah, social media is giving us a bubble in a lot of different senses.
Yeah, and it's hard to escape. Like this audience capture is incredibly strong. I think everybody carries that audience capture fallacy a little. I think that that the big wins are made at the intersections, and I think every wave has its intersections. For me, it's fascinating to now learn how deep the options and convertible note rabbit hole is, and how complex the mathematics around options pricing is. But it's the topic of the moment, understanding how Seyr does his convertibles and what it implies, and there are some people that now have their moment to shine, and I think this is super cool, because yes, there are waves of topics where these intersections become relevant, and then the thing moves on, the monster moves on, but in a way the people stay, and so it just enriches the community as such, that there's so much great talent that you can source from and learn from, and it's a super privilege to be part of that community.
Absolutely, really cool. We have one more end routine of the podcast, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question: are you already thinking in sats? And if not, why not?
That's a super interesting question. Truth is, where it makes more sense, I denominate in where it makes more sense for me. So if I am thinking in covering my basic supplies, I'm thinking in Swiss francs or in dollars. This is almost 1-to-1. But when it comes to longevity and investment decisions, I actually really think in Bitcoin. And if you think about buying a house, and then you go through you choose these different moments in time, and you stock take how much a house of a given value might have costed, and you see that the number of Bitcoin that you would need for it goes down, then it's actually a motivation and a booster to think in Bitcoin, because it rewards you on an idea basis. It rewards you for the patience and the endurance and the resilience that you had, and it motivates for not spending at all. Yeah.
Thinking in taking Bitcoin as the unit of as your own unit of account is a superpower. I said it multiple times in the podcast, and I think it's really good. Perfect. Thank you so much, Harald, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Oh, you can find my Twitter profile under @Harald Rauter, which is HARALDRAUTER. DMs are open. Please find me there. Happy to interact and engage and connect to anyone who is interested in the topics that I was talking about.
And as with every guest, the contact link is directly in the description. You can just click it, and you will be directly point towards Twitter. Usually, 99% of the people have a Twitter account. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, Harald. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye.